I want to call this meeting to order. Good evening. So this is the City of Newcastle Planning Commission. If I can have a roll call, all of the commission members here. Cynthia, would you please start?
Cynthia Batty.
Kristen Dumar. Margot Rain.
Anthony Graves. David Majewski.
Okay, I think we have a quorum. And our next item of business is the minutes from the March 10th meeting. Do I have any corrections for the minutes?
Margaret, the location is incorrect. That's the office.
Oh, yeah.
That's the other thing.
Anyone else have any comments or corrections to the minutes? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Excuse me, I can't hear anyone speaking.
Oh,
I motion to approve Rivera.
do I have a second?
Kristen Zumar, I second.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? The minutes are approved as, with the correction of the location.
Which is,
Senior Center.
It was-
Yeah, it's
yeah.
listed.
it was at the senior center last time?
Yes.
Yeah, from here.
Okay.
How did you forget that?
Wake up.
Um, The next order of business is the annual report to the city council. Enacted last year was a requirement by the city council of Newcastle that all of the standing committees, and the planning commission being one, submit a report to the city council as outlined. So they sent me a form, and this is the first one I've done. So I wanted to share this with everyone on the commission to see if you guys have any additions, if there's anything I've missed, or you think something that I should have added to this report to go to the city council.
It seems to touch on everything.
Anyone, oh, good, Cynthia?
Am I live? No. Thank God I have her here.
Technology is always the hardest. You should have a little green light.
Oh, we got green. Yeah, okay. All right, cool, thanks. Under additional education,
Which number?
number 2.
Okay.
I've also recommend that everybody needs a FOIA class, so that's good. But we've had classes from Max, which I'm sure he hates teaching, on zoning, and I think for people who are new, that's extremely helpful to understand, the terms of reference of what we're talking about. So I would also recommend that we add, if not from you, Max, from somebody else who could give that material. Is there no one in the world who could do that, but you?
There are many people in the world who do it, but if you call the university and ask who do you have, they're gonna send me.
It's gonna be you. All right, well, we like you, so you'll do. But I really, that helped me a lot when we had those classes. And, this is not a topic that, unless you're familiar with it, you just dive in and know. So even if you know contracting, so that would be my recommendation.
Okay. And Antonina, we'll talk further about looking at when those next set of classes are gonna be. Unless we think there's enough of us that it makes sense to have Max do a private.
I don't think it would hurt if we open it up, do one training for council people, planning commission, boards of adjustment, everybody
Well, hack
did,
too.
right, hack,
Yeah.
whoever's got anything that's interested, let's just do it once.
Yeah.
Because one thing I hate more than teaching is teaching twice.
Yeah.
The same-
I get you. I feel your pain. Okay, all right.
Oh, well, I do have one other question. It says we currently have an opening. What is the opening on our commission?
Well, we're approved for up to 9 members.
Okay,
We have 8.
thank you.
Anyone else have any comment? Chris, I didn't miss anything, did I?
I don't believe that you did.
Do I have a motion to approve this report?
Kristen Zumar, motion to approve.
David Mieski, second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay. Our next order of business is to discuss the request for an extension of the project at 427 West 7th Street, known as the Battery. And I see you've already signed in. Good job, thank you. Is that a green light?
I
Okay.
think it's on now. Commissioner Rain, or Chairman Rain and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to make this request. As we have all been through many sessions of this project, we have been diligently working the past 12 months to get this project fully in compliance with the conditions that were set for our site approval. The comments that were listed that needed to be updated on our drawings are no problem whatsoever. The thing that has taken the most time is the approvals from outside authorities on the list that was listed in Mr. Rogers' letter. While we didn't expect it to take 12 months or longer, we probably should have, considering how many pieces there are to this project and how many times we appeared in front of you all. All of those things now need to be worked through various agencies. What we put into your packet is the most recent approvals we've seen, so you can see the dates of things that we have received. Most notably, we just received full DelDOT approval for our curb cuts and for the traffic pattern. That was received in March, so you can see the date that we received that approval, just hitting up on 12 months. We did have a plan, one of the reviewers switched out midstream, which caused some delays in reviewing our project. The other one that is very visible with the city and its staff is the sewer agreement. While the plans reviewer for Newcastle County Special Services has fully reviewed our building plans and has no comments. And we've all received a draft of the sewer agreement. The fact that there is a pump station involved has created a layer of complexity. And it is down now just to the access that the county wants to that pump station. So effectively, if you recall, I have a map here in case it's necessary, but ultimately you have the pump station on our property, you have the city land that the pump station used to be on, and then you have access across our site to the pump station. So we're down to the remaining factor, which is the county and city making sure that the county has access to the pump station site. We had a large meeting with everyone involved, including city officials and county officials and ourselves about a month and a half ago, and I think that we're almost to the end of that. We should be able to present shortly. The other one that I put in there, the one that's the longest lead time, just to give everyone expectations, has to do with FEMA, and that is regarding the fact that the Gamba Corda dike was built and completed by the Army Corps and FEMA and all of the associated agencies. However, the associated mapping of the FEMA map tiles was not completed as a part of that construction. So effectively, FEMA updates their maps every 10 years or so, and the work that was done and the money spent on the dike did not make it into the last updated cycle. So what that means for our project is there's something called a limited moderate wave action line. This is a line that is produced when the storm surge comes up and you need to design a certain level of retaining wall to withstand the limited to moderate wave action. So when we submitted our plans to FEMA, we were under the impression that this line had moved shy of the dike, but on their maps, they showed that the line was still impacting our site. So we had to say, well, do you guys know that there's this dike that's there, built by you guys and by federal agencies? And they said, yes, we are aware of it, and yes, you know, we understand, but the datum didn't make it into the last planning cycle. So if you guys would like that limited moderate wave action line reflected accurately, you're gonna need to pay for the mapping exercise. So that's what we did, and we are now in that review process. We even worked with the Delaware delegation to get help as to, you know, this situation. And we are in the review process now. The data that so the process is they have us hire a consultant recommended by FEMA who uses the FEMA process to review all the data on existing conditions. As a reminder, this isn't anything new. This is what's already out there today, just looking at the way that FEMA does the data. And so we paid for that modeling work. That modeling work showed exactly what you would all hope, which is that the limited to moderate wave action line is now shy of the dike. And so that is going through a 90-day review process that started about 30 days ago. When that happens, it does go to a public comment period after that fact. So we were told the public comment period is 3 months also, with an additional month of review in case there are any comments during that public comment period of time. So realistically, that is the longest lead item for this list of conditional approvals. So we believe that considering the conditions will be met sometime in September, we would ask that, you know, we're asking for a 12-month extension to allow us time to get our building plans in once we've gotten the fully approved site plan. So we think it's a reasonable request, and we appreciate the ability to present to ask that today. And I'm here to answer any questions, of course.
Chris, you had comments?
No, I can confirm everything Mr. Snowberger said about them proceeding with trying to get approvals from the other agencies. City staff and I have been involved with the meetings with the county. We've been in communications about the status of the various approvals. So the section 230-46L of the zoning ordinance states that approvals of site plans shall be valid for 1 year, for a 1 year period from the date of planning commission approval, and shall expire at the end of such period unless building construction has begun. So I have no issue with the extension request. The only point of clarification, and just want to make sure we're all on the same page, is that you haven't received approval from, the next step is approval from city council.
Yes, that's correct. As we understand the process, once we meet the conditions, we have to go to one final approval at city council before the site plan is made official. I don't know if your signature comes first or that comes first, I forget, but I do know that we need to go in front of city council once everything is prepared.
We have approved the site.
Yes, the planning commission conditionally approved the site plan, and most of the conditions were relative to the approvals from the other agencies. We want to make sure that before the site plan, that when the site plan goes to city council, it's an ministerial approval. 99.9% of the things, the approvals are in place, and it's just a matter of letting, you know, per the regulations, the city council has the final say on site plans. And there's also, if you remember, a subdivision plan embedded in this site plan process, and that has to also be approved by city council and also get recorded. But we don't want them going to city council until everything is buttoned up with your conditions of approval on both the site plan and the subdivision.
Commissioners, do you have any questions?
What was the minor, what was the, on the del dot, it said there was a update in February?
So essentially, the last reviewer, when I said that there was a switch in reviewers, had said that we would be eligible to apply for a 35-foot width from the street from where our, one of our staircases in the front, so we have two staircases heading up to the property. One of those staircases as designed was within a 35-foot width from the road. And the previous reviewer said, oh, you're eligible for an exception, you just need to apply for it. And the new reviewer said they won't grant that to you. So we worked with the city to move that staircase just out of that width. And I can essentially, there's two staircases here, and the width that they were saying the public access or the access was within a line that's about 10 feet here. So there was a portion of that staircase that was in that no-no zone. And the last reviewer said that we could get an exception for that. The new reviewer said, I'm not going to give you that. We had to move the staircase slightly this direction to this side here. So it's still there, it's just slightly moved. And then there was also a bench. We had a bench, which was one of the requirements to put.
We asked for that bench.
Well, we still certainly have it. It just had to move. It had to move without a certain right of way. I think the idea is that eventually if they want to widen the road, they have enough width to do that. That was the minor change. We're hoping it's minor.
Anyone else? Other questions? Do I have a motion to extend?
I'll make a motion to extend the timeframe for, how do I say it? Pardon?
Motion to extend the timeframe for 1 year.
For 1 year, okay. Thank
I'll
you.
second the motion.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
The next order of business is a discussion of potential ordinance regulations regarding short-term. And before we get into that, I just want to say the planning commission was tasked by city council to consider the issue of short-term rentals, which have been legal in the city of Newcastle since the mid-1960s. And the regulations have not changed since then. To that end, we are taking a slow and deliberate approach to this issue, listening to all sides. There are a number of stakeholders in this situation, property owners, business owners, neighbors, etc., all of which must be carefully considered. We've had 2 meetings where community members voiced their thoughts and 2 commissioners expressing different points of view on the issue. Just because you disagree with someone's opinion or their research does not mean their opinion or their research does not mean that their opinion or research is less valuable than yours. Research can and often does show different results, which is why it is important to look at more than one set of research. What is most important in this situation is to calmly and respectfully listen to all the views and then to try to construct an answer that will best serve the city of Newcastle. A result will not be rushed into, nor will we go into this discussion with a decision already made as to the final ordinance. Tonight, we have the first draft of this ordinance. We will discuss this as a commission and make revisions. In the future, we will have a public hearing, and then the Planning Commission will send our recommendations to the City Council. I ask that you show the commissioners the respect for the hard work we are attempting to do on everyone's behalf. We are all volunteers, And if you were on the other side of this issue, you would what your concerns listen to as well. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that the planning commission can only make recommendations to city council. We cannot approve anything. So, with that being said, Max, would you like to jump in?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes. So, as everyone may recall, I said I would take on, we had a worksheet last time, which we went through the worksheet. I took notes as best I could. And I told you that I'd try to put something together, and I told you I would get it wrong. And I'll guarantee you I got it wrong in some instances, because it's very hard to draft as a group. But I think it might be beneficial to both the commission and the public if I walk through and just said what I did and why I did it, and then we can work backwards, Madam Chair, on how we do it. So,
Perfect.
one of the very first items that I think we discussed last time was the elimination of the definition or the ability to have a tourist home. So that is the very first section of our ordinance. And we had to come up with definitions. And while we only talked about 2 definitions that we wanted, I added a third, and I'll tell you why I did that. So there was discussion about, obviously, there was a lot of definitions battered around about short-term rentals. So I looked at other states, I looked at the local guys, I did everything. This is a relatively common definition. It doesn't have to be our definition, but there was some, let's put it this way, there's some synergy with that definition. Somebody wrote it and a lot of people copied it. So that's the reason that definition is there. A bed and breakfast, that is exactly the definition that I had in the last presentation, and I didn't go looking too hard to change that. But it was interesting in your code, hotel, motel, and inn are words that are used, but for whatever reason, that's an undefined term in your code. Well, I don't know, probably just missed it along the way. But the idea was I wouldn't want there to be an issue if somebody had a short-term rental and then they call themselves a hotel or a motel. Let's define what each of those things are. This one particularly came from Rehoboth. You can pick whatever definition they are, varied amongst jurisdictions. Why did I pick Rehoboth? It's because I had 4 codes up and that's the one I looked at and I thought that was a good definition and I used it, but there's no magic to it. Start.
They all have different tax statuses though, and I think it's important to make a note.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't unaware of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we go through to section 5, 6, section 5 and 6. And so that just eliminates tourist homes because we eliminated that term. If we get down to section 7, you will see that there is a discrepancy within our code. If you look under where it says 12, it says bed and breakfast, 1 parking space, and I add the word off-street because that's the way your code defines it, off-street. But then if you go down to section 8, number 6 said there were 2 parking spaces required. And so just for consistency, I made them 1 parking space, just to make them the same. If you want to jump into 2, there's a discrepancy in the code. That's why it was made. So how did I go through trying to find tourist home? I just had to do searches of your code. I went through the best I could. If I missed one, I missed one. But I tried to go through and deal with that. There are other provisions that are outside the zoning code that also refer to tourist homes. I wasn't going to try to get into that until we got further along. I'm just dealing with the zoning code. So then we go to section 9, and that's really the heart of sort of what we're looking at. And looking at different codes, everybody's got a way that they write their code, right? Like certain code drafters, like if you look at Ocean View in Newcastle County, there are different text styles that go into those codes. And looking at the Lord knows umpteen number of codes that I read to try to come up with something, I determined that those styles didn't work for us. That they just didn't work, just the way the code textually worked. So I had to do a little freewheeling, taking the concepts that we discussed and trying to put them all in, obviously borrowing from good language where I could borrow from. So what do we have here? The first one is short-term rentals and residential dwellings are permitted in basically, because I thought this was my instruction, every residential unit or residential classification that we have. What did we exclude from that? We excluded from that the industrial areas and the open space areas and things of that nature. So if there was a provision, if there was a zoning category that could have residential dwellings, the way it's written now is they're all part of this, they're all subject to it.
Max, so the information that I had requested, the zoning parcels, it specifically listed all the parcels that had residential areas in it.
That's correct.
So those are the areas that we're looking at.
Yep. And if I got one wrong, I'm sorry, I was just reading the code. But all of these districts allow residents.
It's a significant expansion of the current state.
It is, I was just trying to do what I was told.
No, I get it, but I think it's
So
worth pointing it
it's
out.
very difficult to draft amongst a group, but that's why I'm telling you what I did,
Yeah,
and you
you're
guys tell
doing
me
good.
what to do.
You're good.
So one of the pervasive things was that that I thought that there needed to be licensing and inspection. And so there was a lot of discussion, I don't know that we came to any consensus or anything like that, was that if you had to have an Airbnb, you should have a business license and a rental license under the current regime. So I said, let's keep that in as part of the current regime. That's the way the code works now. You need both of those licenses. There was also a statement that talked about sort of, we need to do an inspection or have some sort of something else, okay? And so I tried to come up with an inspection, a life safety inspection, which is a relatively common term where I come from. You know that, right? So what do you look at? You have basic stuff. The way that I've written it is, so we didn't have to get so granular, coming up with a checklist to be voted on, was to say that's gonna be established. Now, I have must-dos that I'm gonna get to in a moment that have to be in there. But, for example, if the building inspector went in and said the foundation, this house is off the foundation, you're not gonna issue a license even though it's not part of the checklist because there's gonna be some there, but you get my point. So I wanna leave some flexibility for the city to come up with its own checklist and try to engage in that work.
Should that be a defined term, life safety inspection?
I intentionally didn't, but I intentionally didn't because it could be difficult to, right?
Okay.
So, but it is a term, Chief, it's a term of art that I've used for years, to make sure that it's habitable and.
Yes, sir. So, a neighboring municipality does life safety inspections under their fire marshal's office, and that is, it's not a fire inspection. They can't, I don't believe, be fined off of it, at least off of the initial findings. However, whoever does the inspection, so for example, I know there was a lot of conversation, I watched the video from the last meeting about the fire company being involved in the life safety inspections or some part of that. We're on board with that. We've had conversations with city staff about potentially starting that. So it gives them an avenue to say, it doesn't have to necessarily be the building official. It can be someone from the fire department who's approved or someone from the city code office or whatever. But then if they flag it, they can go back and say, hey, we found these issues that they're not compliant, or it moves forward to say, hey, they found something that they're in complete violation of.
And so that's why I use the term life safety. So I will tell you that with an Airbnb, I'm gonna call it, I should go back and use a short-term rental, use the appropriate terminology. With that, it's easier to get inspections on those because of the turnover rather than it is in a long-term rental. Now, a long-term rental, the tenant has the possessory right, and you have to get a warrant if they say you can't come in. With respect to a short-term rental, when it turns over, it's the owner that's gonna have it inspected. I proposed 2 years, figuring that would be about right for the turnover. And you have a little more flexibility in making sure that those inspections occur because there's not somebody who has a possessory interest for all that time. So you have a little more flexibility in this regard. I made up the fee of $150. And I'll tell you why I made up a fee of $150, because I had a huge litigation with the city of Newark saying their rental permit fee was too high. And it was very expensive. And we went all the way through litigation and they froze their fee at $275. I know $150 is reasonable in the cost of providing the service, which is the inspection. There is, and you'll see that you said you have to have a short-term rental license. There's no additional fee for the short-term rental license. And why did I go with that route? Well, you already had to have a rental license. You already had to have a business license. So all you're doing is paying for the inspection. That's the $150, right? So it's a free license, but you have to pay for the inspection.
That license needs to be identifiable, because today we have short-term rentals that are not identifiable,
And
and, yeah.
And going forward, I'll get to where I tried to get to that point.
Okay.
Answer it. There's no, again, there's a cadence that goes along. There's a cadence that goes along with sort of this, right? So I gave a 2-year, was, oh, okay, all right.
It died.
I definitely need the microphone for folks on here, right? So it'll be, so there's a couple provisions in here that might be controversial. One is, shall be not more than 2 persons per bedroom. That's the way I wrote it, because that's in some codes. One could argue maybe that somebody could have 3 because they have a child, or 2 adults, or whatever. I just wrote it, right? And we can talk about that, right? So, and then the last one is sort of a clean hands. You can't get a rental license if you owe the city taxes or that kind of thing. So, one of the things we talked about was sort of having a local person, or in some instances, some folks said somebody living on premise. I didn't go that way, at least for purposes of this draft. I went with the local contact, and there's different codes that define this in different ways. To tell you the truth, I kind of made this up by amalgamating different codes. So most of it, you're not gonna see this exact phraseology. But I use the term 10 miles, and why did I come up with that? Well, I live in Newark, it's about 10 miles away, and I could get over here pretty darn quickly if there was a problem. Not that I'm gonna own a rental property, I guarantee I won't, but, or an Airbnb, right? But it's somebody who's gotta respond, right? And then there's also sort of requirements later on about how many days you can book, so it's the local contact's responsibility also to keep the records that are required by the city. To Commissioner Batty's point, so to let them know about that, I tried to address that with this, what I call interior placard. Some people call it different things, but, so it's items that have to be conspicuously placed visible inside the short-term rental. Like I was thinking, when you walk into a hotel or whatever, here's your stuff, right? And I was trying to think of what that was. It's number, maximum occupancy, off-street parking, contact information, emergency numbers, waste and recycling schedule. We could argue what else has to be on that, but that's what I thought was a decent start to have on that placard. We could talk about that.
Excuse me. The question was not about a placard, so I'm sorry if you misunderstood me. The question was, when I did a FOIA to the city asking for all the short-term rentals, the ultimate answer after a lot of back and forth is that they didn't know. So the city, somewhere in here, we need to define that the city needs to keep track of them and then validate that they're compliant with the requirements of the law.
And I heard that loud and clear. Let me get through.
Oh, I think you were thinking you addressed my thing.
No, that was on the.
Oh, gosh.
That was
Sorry,
not.
okay.
That was so that the renter, person who's coming into town, the short-term renter, knows that this is a licensed establishment. It's got the stuff in there that it needs. It's had its inspection, et cetera. So the building
I'm sorry.
requirements is to meet all health, safety, fire-related things. And then, so I told you before, I intentionally didn't have a statement in there of what needs to be part of the checklist, but I thought these were must-dos, right? So in other words, the building inspector can add stuff, or his or her designee can add things, but these were sort of the ones. I pulled these from Lewis because I thought they were pretty good. Now, I also have 2 off-street parking spaces required, and we talked about parking spaces. The reason you could do 1, you could do 0, you could do all kinds of different things. The reason I went with 2 off-street parking spaces is because that's what's required for a tourist home right now. So That's the reason I picked it, right? And I was thinking, well, what are the prohibitions, right? And so the host commercial activities, right? And then this was out of another code that I read, so somebody can't argue that their tent is a short-term rental or their RV is a short-term rental or something like that. A 270 calendar day limitation. And the reason I did that was because that was one of the times, I don't know if we came to any consensus on that. And the other thing that at least I gathered from the discussion was that we wouldn't want an entire zoning district to be loaded with short-term rentals. So I picked an arbitrary 15%. There's no study of that. That's really a percentage that you guys would do. To Commissioner Batty's statement about sort of, you know, what the city could do. And that's why I put in violations here. And in the violation section, that gives the city the opportunity to prosecute if folks don't follow the law. Here, right, these are all violations that are there. You can read those. There's all kinds of different violations, some of which I pulled from some codes, some of which I pulled from other codes. I just tried to make a list. We could debate whether or not all of those are the right ones, or there should be other things in there, but we had to start somewhere. I decided herein to do its own fine section. I usually do, but I didn't think that the section of the zoning code was sufficient to be able to sort of address some of these things. So it's not less than 100. Up to 500, but there's the city can, if it chooses, for the first violation to issue a written notice instead of a fine, right? If somebody makes an innocent mistake, there should be an out for that they should have a fine. If it's a repeat offenders, I use 6 violations, right? 3 or more of the same offense or 6 violations total, the city may revoke the license. And then there's the provision that at the end, which makes remedies cumulative. So if you had a problem house and it was also a short-term rental, you can go after them for those other things too. Like a property maintenance or something to that effect. So the last 2 are boilerplate. And then on section 12, I just want to point out the way it's currently written is that the ordinance is effective upon adoption. It means that if you adopted this tomorrow, which we're clearly not going to, but if you adopted it tomorrow, there would be no exemptions from it. The way it's currently written, you might want to add exemptions. So I hope that explanation helps you all understand at least why I did, in case you read it and say, why did that knucklehead do it that way? I was just trying to do my best to get something that addressed from that checklist everything we did. But again, parts of it are written whole cloth, parts of it are borrowed. I was just trying to get the moray of the planning commission and the comments you guys made. So with that, Madam Chair, it's the chair's prerogative, but what might be helpful is for each member to see if they have any changes right now that they definitely want to make and just sort of start at the end and sort of work their way through. You can do it that way, or you can do it one at a time, or just leave it open for discussion. Because I need guidance at this point. There's not much else I can do.
Sections?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I think that would.
So do you want, Madam Chair, if you're okay, if we're gonna do it that way, I can.
You had my permission.
So the first section is, are we all okay?
And you're skipping that first page, that's the whereases and the what fors?
Yeah, I didn't
Okay.
really talk about that. Man,
Okay,
I just had to write something, right, to make it look like an ordinance, make it longer for Suzanne to read and, you know. You can do it without any whereas.
okay.
It's just an explanation of why we're undertaking this effort.
So we're in section,
So we're in section 1. Does
okay.
anyone object to the removal of the definition of tourist home? Hearing nothing, we'll move on to section 2. There's a definition of short-term rental, and that's a pretty standard definition with the Maxwell and added language that's such as an Airbnb, Vrbo, and there are others similar.
I just want to point out for accuracy that Airbnb is actually capital AIR, B, the letter N, B, all run together.
Okay.
And then Verbo is actually capital V, RBO, there's no I in it. So I just didn't know we needed to point that out for.
You can tell how many times I've looked at those.
Yeah.
websites. There you go. I will make those changes. Yeah.
It's not gonna. In our last meeting, it was brought up that sometimes these short-term rentals are used for traveling nurses, business people coming in. I would suggest because of that, these are already furnished units. They're not, apartment living spaces generally, they could be. I would amend that to be 180 days or less.
That's a half of a year. That's too far.
So how do we,
Think we need a.
can we
How do we
create
accomplish that?
another, category that would be an intermediate rental?
The regular rentals should solve that problem.
People are looking for an already furnished apartment or something like that for 6 months.
So you have an already furnished apartment that you can rent for a year or 6 months. I think if we could, that created a lot of consternation in the last conversation we had. I don't know, can you hear me okay? The definition of short-term rental in Delaware law is 31 days. So if we're talking about a short-term rental, that's 31 days. And that is the subject of these sort of tourist activities, which is what everybody says this is about. If you want to have a longer term rental, get a longer term rental.
So I would support, so under the landlord tenant code. Okay, you have to give 60 days notice to a tenancy at will. What it is, right? So let's say I'm no landlord tenant person, but I do know this. So I go in and I'm living at a place and I don't have a lease. The landlord wants me out, right? I gotta give a 60-day notice. It's gotta come in before the first day of the month, et cetera, et cetera. To me, any short-term rental that would be longer than 60 days, like you could extend that out, where you would fall into a different section of the landlord tenant code and how that all works. I don't know that I would do it. I can create a longer term, I could create an intermediate category for up to 180 days. I could do that, but if somebody's gonna be here for 3 months or 6 months, they're gonna sign a lease, and I know that the evil is sort of a problem. That, you know, the evil that you're trying to cure, the perceived evil that you're trying to cure, whatever you wanna call it, thing that you're trying to legislate about, I don't know if that's true. So I would keep that. If you wanted to change it to 45 days, oh, I don't care, right? You get my point. Like when we get to bed and breakfast, I use 7, could that be 14? Sure.
So again, Max, how do we ensure, because if I'm, just reading this, I'm not gonna know if I can do those short-term, those longer-term intermediate-term rentals, less than a year, but more than 30 days. So how do I make it clear that that's an option?
Making a note, because I'm gonna add something.
Okay,
I don't know exactly what I'm gonna add, but I understand the concern raised by both of you. I think we can do a rather neutral, nothing's perfect, but I think I can come up with something that will satisfy the concern.
okay, perfect.
Okay. It seems to me, though, that the legal structure of the occupancy is different in a 2 or 3 day rental versus a 3 or 6 month rental.
It is.
I mean, we discussed tenant occupancy notices, all that kind of stuff. Again, I think that rental laws are sufficient to provide that option. That's not what this is. This is for people to come in and stay for a weekend and, hopefully eat in our restaurants and go to our museums, not to, go through a nursing residency or something like that. I mean, that's a different kind of relationship.
I think I can solve this issue.
I mean, at least you can give a reference to how, go to the rental code or whatever, but otherwise you're into how do you evict people on a 3 day rental?
Right,
I mean, you
you're more
really
like
get
a hotel.
confused about the
You're more
law.
like a hotel or
Yeah.
short term.
We're gonna address a little bit. Sorry, thank you. If you wanna address, the short-term rentals, we're gonna have the longer-term rentals, address cover it all now.
But this is not about long-term rentals. This language is not about
Right, we
long-term
already
rentals.
have that language, I'm just saying. I think
Right,
it's
so
best to
just
address
reference
all.
it. You can include it by reference, you don't have to rewrite anything.
I think it's adding.
I have a question. So is the concern here that you may rent to someone and that they decide they don't want to leave? I'm trying to understand what the concern is. If you have someone that's renting, we have a traveling nurse. She's got a 30-day position. Is the concern that she may not want to leave and the proprietor of that establishment is not following the law? I'm just trying to get some clarity on that there.
I don't know, I think you need to ask your fellow commissioners, so
So I will ask my fellow commissioners, is that what the concern is? And is there a history of that being a problem where we have tenants who come and then they are in short-term rental and then they don't want to leave and they can't get them out and they're behaving bad?
the different laws apply to these short-term rentals than they are for like a tenancy at will or like when you have a lease. That's all I can say. So it's harder to get somebody else out that has a longer term lease. Than like if you're at a hotel room, they can say, hey, you didn't pay your bill, get your stuff out of your room. And I'm no expert on that, I'm just aware.
Thank you.
I have a similar kind of comment. So I think the issue is that if it's at 31 days, we're assuming it's non-renewable. But I think with like Airbnb or with permission from the owner, they can potentially renew every 31 days. Is that allowable?
Possibly, the intent is certainly for less than 31 days for the large majority of these. Could there be situations where you could renew at least for one term? Probably.
I mean, you know,
There becomes a point when it's not a short-term rental, when it becomes a longer duration rental.
I mean, I think 180 is a little long, but maybe we could meet somewhere in the middle or come up with some additional language that would allow a little bit more flexibility. I don't know what you would suggest, but I mean, I think it could be considered.
I think I understand the heart of it. I think with just a sentence or two, I can get it. I don't want to give it to you now because I don't have it mapped out, but I would have to look at the landlord tenant code to sort of get it, but I think I can get you there.
One thing I would say to bear in mind in this question is that people who are staying for a long time don't want to pay $150 a night, which is the average rental in the historic district today. There are 3 illegal Airbnbs in the rest of the city which are charging $50 a night. So they might be more interested in some kind of a solution like that, where people could stay longer if they wanted to. But generally speaking, when you find people who are coming on longer term extended stays, which I have done myself in foreign countries, you end up in a place where you're trying to pay a lot less per night for your room than you are here. Now, you could do a deal, and I know in the case of the one across from the Mercury, they did do a deal once, to let somebody stay there for 6 months, because they were doing this for 5 or 6 months. If Dwayne was here, he could correct me, but it was a long time. Because I wanted to get somebody from my family to stay in it. But they then did a deal to reduce the price. But if you're staying on a short-term pricing basis in the historic district, you're paying a lot of money a night, and it's inimical to staying forever for many months to do a project like that. Even corporations don't like to pay that kind of money. Just saying.
But the code is covering more than just the historic district, correct?
And this is across the board, the
Okay.
way it's written right now, every district where you can have a residence, that's what it's written for. You guys can tell me you do or you don't want to do that, that's just the way I wrote it, because that's what I understand. Can we move on to bed and breakfast? That's just a new definition. I'm trying to remember, and I don't remember if 70 days was in your current code or not, I just don't.
To the best of my knowledge, it's not.
Yeah, I can't.
I didn't understand why short-term rental and bed and breakfast were defined separately, but then no conditions were attached to bed and breakfast as there were in short-term rental? Or is it your vision that the terms, the safety inspection, you know, all that other stuff, the licensing and all that?
So the tourist home, the tourist home as it is defined in the code had several different, things within the code. So I changed tourist home to bed and breakfast. So whatever would have applied to this tourist home, you can see I knocked out tourist home, so you have to go through this. So I felt that those were adequate protections that were already in the code. And so by changing the name, by changing the terminology, keep those protections. You could argue it better on that, so maybe we need different protections for bed and breakfast, but that's what I did.
But it would still need a license of some kind.
Still need a rental
Correct.
license, still need a rental license.
But a rental license that clearly identified it as a bed and breakfast.
Correct.
Okay, as long as we're clear on that, because losing sight of that then starts to impinge on our ability to judge whether we're at the 15% or whatever it is we.
So there was some talk about a bed and breakfast, which I didn't know where it was or where it was. I didn't want to add anything with respect to the bed and breakfast. That would kind of remain the way it was, so I tried to just fix that with the tourist home definition.
But part of the challenge there is that we have the Terry House in town, which is a 100-year-old bed and breakfast, which is not going to be able to meet the parking requirements here and never has. And one of the things I brought up is I thought we needed to grandfather that in some way, shape, or form.
That's the kind of thing we would do in that last section. Remember, we were talking about that. It's effective now.
Yeah.
Like, that's where you would put an exemption.
So you wanted to say something?
So the hotel, motel, and inn, I did that just to clarify. We can come up with 15 definitions, but at least for present purposes, does this one look okay?
I would just say they're all for profit. Everybody's doing this for profit. It's not, to single it out as for profit, it's just a different legal structure, different tax structure.
I just borrowed from Rehoboth on this one, so I'll take out the profit if you want me to.
I don't see a large difference between that and bed and breakfast, because if you have two people in a unit, so just the owner occupied is the difference. That to me just seems.
Owner occupied, and it's
7
more than 10.
Is the Terry House owner occupied?
Yes, it is.
I didn't know, so.
And I checked it out. They have, somewhere else in here you mentioned no more than 8 rooms. Terry House has 7 rooms and no plans to increase that. So it solved that problem. What it doesn't do is solve armies of people moving into big houses and staying there, which I'm not sure was the vision of this either. So the room count might become an issue.
The room count is in the definition of bed and breakfast, that's where it is, it's 8.
Eight
That was a
designated
guess.
rooms. Yeah,
That was a guess.
you did good.
Yes.
Yes, you did good.
So let's go over and sort of go through then on the next sections. For the bed and breakfast, we have this discrepancy in the code. I changed it to 1 parking space per room. You want 1 or 2, because you have one section of the code that says 2 rooms, you have another section of the code that says 1.
Per room.
So what we need to be careful about is by requiring off-street parking, do we basically make everybody that's doing this no longer able to continue their business?
So hang on, so there's 2 different parking requirements that are in this, I just want to make sure we're.
Oh, okay,
apples
I'm
to
with you.
apples. There's a provision there for bed and breakfast, it's already in the code, 1 section says 2 spaces, 1 section says 1 space. I don't care, I just want, that's an error in the code. So I've written it as 1 space, if everybody's okay with 1 space for bed and breakfast, then we can move on to the short-term rentals and deal with that issue.
Gee, I think the 1 space per room is probably sufficient. I mean, most people are, if you're staying in the same room, you're probably traveling together.
That's what I thought, but you guys are recommending to me, right? I'm just trying to walk through the best I can.
Same wavelength.
So hearing that, I have listed every residential district and to have bed and breakfast. Any discussion on that?
To have bed and breakfast?
Or not that, short-term rentals.
Okay.
As some of you know, I ran for an office recently, and I spent a lot of time talking to people outside of the historic district, and I found a lot of resistance from people outside the district who didn't want short-term rentals. So I think if you want to include them, we need to do a little bit more work to ascertain whether those neighborhoods want that or not. Because what the feedback that I got is they did not. So, you know, I mean, I hope that they come forward and feel enabled to say something about that, but they didn't want it.
So,
They felt that at one more time it was the historic district making decisions about the whole city and that wasn't fair.
I guess my point is, I don't care what districts you allow them in. I don't care if you say we want to ban short term. I don't care, right? What I'm gonna say is, the rule that I'm gonna put in is, if you're going, you can't do it in a part of a district. All districts have to be uniform, okay? And you can say, we don't want any Airbnbs in town. You can do whatever you want, I don't care. But if you're gonna do it, it's gotta include, you can't say in this part of an area, we're gonna allow it, this part we're not.
We should do it by zone,
You do it by, I call it district, yes.
by zone.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, yeah, because these are zones that you've identified here. Okay,
I call
I
it
think
zoning districts. I
we're in
think we're-
violent agreement.
All right, so we're gonna move on from that for present purposes. Licensing, basically, it's business license, rental license, life safety inspection, $150 per inspection. It's laid out. And the rental license will be for 2 years. Does anyone have any sort of issue?
I'm sorry, can we go back to section 8?
Yeah, sure.
I think this is maybe what Margo was referring to. Section 8 talks about off-street parking. Section 7, and they both refer to bed and breakfast.
Correct.
What about not bed and breakfast, the
Short-term
the
rental?
short-term
We're
rentals?
gonna get to that.
Okay.
That's in going forward.
Okay,
This was just, these sections 7 and 8 dealt with existing code, and the short-term rental stuff is all new, so I put it all in the short-term rental stuff.
okay, thank you.
Okay. So we have, again, a rental, housing, business license, a business license, a life safety inspection, $150 for the inspection. License every 2 years. Occupancy limits. And no rental license shall issue if the applicant owes outstanding fines, fees, or taxes to the city. Is there any changes to that?
Are the fees all the same, even if it's a motel or hotel?
Well, I don't recall sitting here today exactly what the business license is, cost, nor do I remember what the
But they would
rental
be
is.
separate.
It's whatever the cost is in the code. It's already in the code. I have no idea what that is. I've never applied for one.
I can elaborate on that. So, owning a restaurant, a hotel is gonna be inspected very differently from a, let's say, a single-family home that's renting a room out. So hotel, and you can confirm this, a hotel has to have X amount of fire extinguishers. You've got multiple inspections for those things. There's annual and then there's biannual inspections. So if someone wanted to build a hotel here, their fees would be much higher than a standard bed and breakfast. If a bed and breakfast decides to put in a commercial operating kitchen, meaning that they have a hood vent system, they're gonna have a suppression system, their fees are gonna be much higher than someone who does not. So those fees are different for each particular unit.
So, and the reason I didn't mess with that is, they have to get those now for a tourist home, so I didn't change anything. I was trying, there's so many issues with respect to this, I wasn't trying to change anything. I'm just trying to keep it where I can. So going on to section B, we talk about the local contact, the 10-mile distance, and the record keeping requirement. Does anyone have any changes or suggestions with respect to that section.
That local contact doesn't have to be the owner then.
No, at least the way I have it written, Margot, or, excuse me, Madam Chair,
Marco would,
the idea was if you had let's assume that I lived in Florida, but I had a summer house here, right? I wouldn't be 10 miles away or winter, and I had a property manager, Chris Rogers was my property manager, and he was designated a local contact, and that's at least what was going through my head.
that works. Just one other question, on some of these, I just wanna make sure we don't get ourselves in trouble if our rules on short-term rentals aren't similar to long-term rentals and somebody comes back and says we're being unfair.
So, yeah, well, the word fair doesn't appear in the Constitution. I can just tell you that so I'll admit my deficiency sometimes as an attorney. I was like, what do you mean you could put these? But I had the kind of the same reaction. I did a fair amount of research, not fully exhaustive, but enough to read enough law review articles and enough other jurisdictions to know that these separations, right? If you have everybody's got to draw a line somewhere. That's what legislating is, right? So there's a line between the commercial and the residential district, et cetera. It's the same kind of thing here. That's the way the courts have looked at them, and it is legal to do so. But when I first heard of it, I was like, oh, what's the pitfall there? And courts have generally, unless you do something that's wholly arbitrary or that kind of thing. These, what I put in here, obviously, I try to use the forms that have been upheld and that people have used and try to do it that way. With respect to, are there any further questions with respect to the local contact, Chief?
Yes, I don't know if this is something that necessarily gets written into this, or how you would do it. With the potential of these occupancies being vacant 100 or more days a year, we would probably look for something like a Knox box or an empty access box, that the resident can keep keys in. What it would allow for is that even though that 10-mile contact exists, right? Nothing says that Chris isn't also my local contact, but he went to the Phillies game tonight. We go there for some type of alarm system activation or whatever. We don't necessarily want to break your windows or your door. If there's no one that lives close, no one that is close, or is temporarily out of the area, is there a way to add something like that for emergency access?
I see some constitutional pitfalls, which I'm not going to announce here. Sure. Let me see if I can write something in that, and I'll let you know.
And I can send you more information on what I'm thinking about it.
That's fine. I have an issue in my head. I think the next one, interior placard, is probably the least controversial of anything that I wrote. Does anyone have any additions to that?
Great idea.
So on the next one, I call these my must-dos, building requirement. Working smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguisher, GFI receptacles, and 2 parking spaces. I don't think the first 4 are gonna be an issue. You could fight with me, and you guys can fight amongst yourselves, but whether or not it should be 1 off-street parking space, 2 off-street parking spaces. As I said before, the reason I used 2 is that's what tourist homes require today. So you could make it like the bed and breakfast and go with 1 space. Up to you.
I personally am in favor of 1 space, just to be consistent throughout these types of rental homes. I don't know if anyone else has an opinion on that.
I think that the challenge is that the home could be large and have multiple families coming to visit it. And particularly in the historic district, there's not space on the street for that many cars. And, we have to consider that, I would guess 80 to 85% of residents in the historic residence district park on the street. We do. And, And so if this impinges on that, then it's negatively affecting people who already live here who are parking on the street. So,
It's requiring all-street parking though.
okay, so, but if you go to one and they have two cars, then you end up having a car on the street. Or if
But
they
if
have
a
three
person
cars.
lived in the home and it was their home, they probably have two cars. So whether it's owner occupied and somebody lives there.
Oh.
Whether it's owner occupied and a family lives there full time. Or if it's being rented and they have two cars, I mean, that's kind of the same thing, and you're knocking out most of the homes in this district now by requiring off-street parking now.
You've just made an argument for two spaces.
I just said it's no different than somebody who lives there full time.
Most people who
And
live
they-
there have two spaces. Or two
You-
parking, two cars.
Exactly, so you're not adding to the current.
If you keep two parking spaces as the requirement. If we're.
That's
we're
off
agreeing
street,
to that, yeah.
but that's off street, so
Yeah.
then you're not, what I'm saying is, if somebody lived in that home and there was one parking space off street. And the husband and wife live there and they both have a car, then one car is automatically going to be on the street. So you're not really changing the dynamic with having, two people and having two cars permanently living there, or somebody renting it for 270 days a year, being rented for the same amount of time. You're actually gonna have less permanent parking there, because if we're limiting it to 270 days a year, then the other so many days that unit's not occupied, so there's no parking for anybody.
So you're agreeing then to one parking space.
I personally, because you are gonna limit the district people, I would say no off-street parking. However, I would say one.
I've heard from a couple of members, but do the other members have any view of two spaces or one parking space off street?
But somebody else gonna go.
Go ahead.
John, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, I think I understand what Cynthia's saying. I think it's just, it's very dependent upon, right? Because there's a lot of large homes that people could rent as a short-term rental that have multiple bedrooms. There's also places in Newcastle that barely have 2 bedrooms, so they could run the same ticket. So it's a fine line of, it depends.
May make a suggestion, which might, it's just an idea. But you could do, yeah, I was gonna say less than 3 bedrooms or less, 1 parking space, 4 bedrooms or more, 2. That work for everyone? I wish I'd have thought of that
But
earlier.
if you do that, how's that gonna apply to a bed and breakfast?
Ah.
So this is only gonna apply to short-term rentals, okay.
Bed and breakfast was addressed with one per guest room.
Per guest, yeah.
I think if you do it based on that logic, you'd have to consider number of sleeping accommodations, so if you have like a pull-out bed or something like that.
Let me tell you, no matter what you do, somebody's gonna figure out a way to subvert whatever it is, right?
So-
You just have to do the best you can when you're doing it.
So wait a minute, so right now, we're saying a bed and breakfast has to have 1 parking space per bedroom?
One spot in the code, it says 2 parking spaces per bedroom, and another spot it says 1 parking.
Okay, but we agreed that we're gonna make it 1.
Correct.
So theoretically, Terry House needs to have 7 off-street parking spaces?
In theory, although it has been there for 100 years.
I'm not, I got that part.
They're
And what we're saying is that we've gotta exempt it.
No, we haven't said that yet.
Well, you may not have, but that's what I'm suggesting.
But I would argue to you that it's a legally existing non-conforming use that we can't take away. It's been there forever.
Okay.
If we're okay with the 1 parking space, 3 bedrooms or less, and more than 4 bedrooms, does that satisfy at least the commission's need on that issue? I have a list of prohibitions. I don't know that we need to go through those today. The 2 that I really want to focus on are the 270 calendar days. You could have it be you can do it 365 days a year if you want to. You can have it that you have 180 days.
So, but what this is saying is that it has to sit vacant for what, 100?
As it stands, for 1/4 of the year. And you could get rid of, I just
I,
want to get
I
the
was
word.
gonna say, as a business person, you might just make this unworkable. Because if you have to be vacant that long, that's a lot of cash flow not to have.
But then you're allowing businesses in residential areas, which is inimical to the concept of a residential area. And this is a very common restriction in short-term rentals globally. Just so you know, see, that you didn't pull this out of your rear end, this is real, this is what people say in other
Yeah,
areas.
so when I did our first, that worksheet that I had, I went and looked, because there's some discussion about that, and there are places that put limitations on them. And if you recall, I had 90, I had all different sort of timeframes in there. I literally picked 270 because there was varying discussion. That could be 365 days a year, web bet, it could be 270, it could be 180. I would probably look at less than 180, but that was me. You guys got to guide me on, one thing you could do is leave it there, and we have our public hearing, you could hear from the public on it, and then you make the change. I mean, the idea of the public hearing is to have people, public do it. Again, number 4, this was to address the concern that we might have a district that's overrun with these, and it's a 15% requirement. That's a little difficult to track sometimes. Just it becomes a tracking mechanism problem for staff, but we just do your best like any other.
For the short-term piece?
Yeah.
But we already are tracking rental units, because they have to get a rental license, assuming they're complying with the
Correct, but
law.
once you get to that 15% ceiling, sometimes it's a
Oh.
little difficult to figure out exactly what 15% of what. I don't know, I'd have to way to rate it.
And the way it's written, it's total residential unit in the zone. So if you assume that there's 500 units in the historic district, that'd be 15% of that. And I was thinking about this earlier, that would put a short-term rental on every street in the city.
15% is an arbitrary Maxwell number.
Right. I would recommend less than that, because that starts to be disruptive to neighborhood life. Yeah.
I looked at the information, that was sent regarding the number of units. And my recommendation is 5% or less.
Okay, I'll go with that. It's a miracle we agree.
Anybody else?
No, because I don't know what the grand number is in any zone to know that what 15% is gonna look like, or 5% or anything like that. So that- kind of-
It's 75 in the historic district. which seems like
75
a lot.
So I originally did mine based on 2.5%. Was my original information that I had based it on, and there are roughly 2,855 total housing units, or total
Say
housing
that
units in 2,855 within the city. Based on the.
City as a whole.
Yes. So you have roughly 535 in historic. And then you have, R1 like has 814, so. My personal, I had started at 2.5%. Calculation here. But, and to have no more than like 10 per district, I don't think. Maybe
Yeah.
15 per district, but I don't think we should be any higher than 5%. My original thought was 2.5%.
That, in the historic districts, a lot of historic district people are here, that would be 25 units
At,
at 5%.
yeah, I think that's why I had,
Yeah.
my original thought was 2.5%.
So hearing
I would even go to 2.5 myself.
So hearing objection, you guys are gonna get a chance to look at this after the public hearing, right? So why not make it 5% now? And then you guys can take up 5% or 2.5% after a public hearing.
That sounds good.
Violations, I did the best I could to list out the violations. I think I did an okay job, but if there's others, I'm sure clerk will tell me. And then we had the lines pieces. Which are relatively standard, go ahead.
With the violations, you just said 6 or 3, is that within a calendar year or within their licensing term of 2 years? I think that it should be,
Should be within a year.
well, 3 within a year, 6 within the licensing, because it's 2-year.
Yeah.
Bear with me, I'm trying to find it.
It's on page 5 at the bottom.
Page 6.
Page 6,
Oh, is it?
three,
Page 6.
Right.
section 3.
Section 3.
Yeah, I think there needs to be
So the
a restriction on the time of, you can't have, you know,
rental
rest of
license,
your-
there is a term there, let's make sure we're clear for the public. The term is during the term of the rental license, so if it's 3 of the same violation, or 6 total. 2 years the way it's there right
That is so disruptive to the neighborhood.
now. But my point is, if it was per year, it'd be less, in other words, there's disruptions. So I try to key everything up, the length of time of the license, if the license is 3 years, I think this 3 years, I try to keep them together. Right, because it'd be hard to track, I got 5 in this year, right, but then I go to my second time.
I guess my point is, if you have 5 in 1 year, then that's a problem, and maybe you should have your license revoked early.
term, but
Yeah,
Yeah, but the
but
term is 2 years, so if you have 6 within the first year,
you're out no matter what, because.
but you could have 5 and then
Because
skip
you get
5.
to 6, right, yeah.
You could have 5 in your first 5 days of having it. And you could go into year 2, 180 days in, and you have the 6th, you're out, the way it's written.
But also read section B, it says each day a violation continues unresolved and constitutes a violation. So if you, I'm just saying.
We can,
Oh, sorry, if you have something, failure to make conspicuously visible the information required in section C. If for 6 consecutive days you don't have that, each of those count as a separate violation. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying the scale of violations vary.
I borrowed this from somewhere, and say right here, I don't know where, but I did it because I didn't want there to be just a continuous fine that was out there, and I wanted to go to the owner. And I wanted to do it during the term of the license. Does anyone want me to change that time frame, the 2-year time frame that's in there? Hearing nothing.
No. I do have a point of view. This is a social experiment that we're talking about here. And by setting it at 2 years, we consign ourselves to a 2-year-long social experiment, which could create a year of misery or 2 years of misery for residents. So why not start it at a year with the option to change it to 2 years after we see how it works for our community?
You guys.
Yeah, I would disagree just because of the cost of license and the cost of inspections and things like that. I mean, I think 2 years is very reasonable to ask and, you know,
These people are in business.
clearly there's, you know, things in place that would, you know, if they have certain violations that they could get it revoked within that 2 years, so it could be earlier than that, but I think 2 years is very reasonable, and I think that, you know, given the costs and things involved, I think that would be fair and of the city to do.
What are the other members their view on from the other members of the commission?
So this would be a radical way to look at it. I own an alcohol license. You get a violation, you're fine. Get another violation, most likely you're gonna lose your license. I spend a lot of money for that alcohol license. It's up to me, it's incumbent on me to manage my facility in a way that is respectful of the license that I'm basically renting, because I don't own that license. So if I want to continue to operate, I have to abide by the laws of OABCC. And it appears to me that we're preparing for a worst case scenario, just in case we're inundated with Airbnbs at a rate of, say, 5%. If you're gonna be tough about it, be tough about it. You get 3 violations, you're gone. Obviously, you can't manage and you're not choosing your tenants properly, your guests, if they're short-term. So we have we wanna be lenient or you don't wanna be lenient, do you wanna prevent them, or do you just wanna go, these are the rules, we're strict, this is Old Newcastle. That's my point. If you're gonna be harsh, you're gonna be tough, be tough. 3 strikes, you're out.
Well, what about the term, like, what's yours?
That's it.
Is 2 years reasonable?
It's based on the amount of violations.
And not of the same offense, so any offense, right?
So I would argue to you that what I've written is pretty damn strict, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the provisions in here is like a building code violation, right? Like you have a bad plumbing or something, right? Well, each day is a separate offense. So if you get one of those and you can't get a plumber in, that's 3 days you would lose your license, right? Not because the house was disorderly or because of anything like that. That's why I try to do 3 of the same 6. I try to make it tough. You could do it as to particular kind of things like noise or whatever. If they're tied to the building code, I think it's sometimes harder.
No, I understand that. And maybe their argument would be like, well, there's an apartment down the street and the police are there 3 times a week and they still have their license to operate. Those are the things that I think about. But if we're preparing for a worst case scenario, then we make it airtight, which you've already done.
So having this debate, would it be okay for present purposes to also hold this? We're gonna change the others, but hold this, which I think is pretty tight, and then you can wait. In other words, you guys are gonna have a public hearing, you're gonna hear from everybody, and then you're gonna make recommended changes. The next step is, I take your comments from this evening, like fixing the spelling of verbo and things of that nature, and making it 5%. I come up with a new draft. We would hear from the public, obviously, today, but we'd set a public hearing. There'd be a public hearing, everyone can say whatever they want, and be out there a month ahead of time, so everybody can look at it instead of a couple days before, and I'm sorry I couldn't get it out any faster due to my schedule, but we're there now. And then everybody can pick it apart and come in, and then we could deal with that issue. Does that sound like a fair way to go? Again, I'm not perfect. I did my best I could with what I had, right?
So following up on what the city administrator said, each day a violation continues unresolved will constitute a separate violation. So if they leave a violation unresolved for 3 days, if they got 3, they're out, right? Is that my read? Is that correct?
That's why I said it was so tough, correct?
Okay, all right. It's hard to clean the toilet in 3 days, just saying, but okay.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So Commissioner, you could do it like different violations have different timeframes. Or like you could say it's a building code thing that's gotta be done in 5 days. There's different ways you could go about this. And there's no great answer.
Is there anything about a database so that people who are possibly looking to move into the city can see what is around their house? Because I think that was something that we wanted to have put into effect, something searchable on the city
So
site that you could say these are short-term rentals.
So I would do that by code. We do this in New York, we list the licenses, so there's a spot on the page, it says here's all licenses. But that's more administrative, you're not really preventing the code unless it's something like that.
It's new for our city though, so we have to be mindful of that. And the inspection, by the way, needs to also inspect for the off-street parking. And that's not included in here. Yeah, that's not.
Well, they can't get the license if they don't have the off-street parking.
Okay, but that's not clearly identified, but you're saying because it's a condition, it's accepted, because when I asked that question recently in the FOIA, nobody knew the answer. So, and I'm not saying that's bad, this is grown up.
This is why we're defining it right now, because it is not currently defined. And why these things aren't done, because there's no mechanism for them to do that.
It's the mechanism I'm concerned about, and I agree with the database idea.
Commissioner, there is a provision within this ordinance and in the license section. So after the life safety inspection, right, where it talks about $150, is following a passing life safety inspection, city shall issue a short-term rental license to the owner, provided that all other requirements of this section and the Newcastle County City Code, so I represent Newcastle County too, city code are satisfied. So in other words, they have to make sure they meet their parking requirement before they get their license or anything else. So it's not just the license.
In regards to, having someone accessible within 10 miles, that we discussed, who physically gets that contact information? So if there is a problem at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, they're not gonna be able to call Antillo. So who, I mean, it's just calling the police.
true, yeah, there's a true emergency.
So-
Thank you. They're gonna contact the fire department, the police department. And they,
But if there's an emergency, like there is a fire, how is the fire company gonna have access to the contact? To say, hey, I'm gonna call Chris because you're the manager and there was a fire in your unit.
So, I mean.
Right.
So it's a twofold. So if there's some type of fire emergency or something like that, we're gonna contact the building official and notify them of the fire. It's their responsibility to follow up on that end. That I would have to imagine that's what's good, because they're gonna need to contact the owner to do their investigation in some way, shape, or form. But the follow-up to that is that, you know, Airbnbs that I've stayed in over the past couple of years, traditionally, when you walk in, there's a binder on the table, on the counter, something, and it's got that information in there that if you have a plumbing emergency, heat-related emergency, if building systems emergency that's not a fire, medical, or police emergency, call this person.
I've never stayed in Airbnb.
I agree with that.
I was trying to,
A lot of-
I was trying to address that with a placard, so if the police had to go into the house or whoever else, so it's a backup. There's no reason why whatever the city's licensing information can't be shared with first responders, right? They ought to have it.
And the follow-up to that is our CAD system, computer aided dispatch, it's shared between the police and the fire department countywide. So we can make that information, what's called premise history information, so that if there is an emergency, if the police go there for a noise complaint, or if we go there for some type of emergency, we can contact the dispatch center and say, hey, can you contact the key holder? And they're gonna call that person and say, hey, we have X problem here, the police or the fire department are here, we need you to respond.
Since we're at a point, can we take a 2-minute break?
Yeah, that works.
Thank you.
Okay.
By right. I was.
Hi. No, it's off.
I don't know if it's the appropriate time to deliver this comment. Just to you and how would it come in?
Sure.
It's not it's all live. They are very hard. Seems to me that requires pretty much. But that's what it is.
I agree with it, that's like, that's about having a session, it's about, that actually concurrent, I'm gonna ask you a question now.
How they decide how to do For example, I would go level one inspection, especially. Right, you just had already.
But that's public parking. But it's not yours. But you know, yes, but I understand your point, but yeah, no, I. Yeah.
Oh, when you say you're not working, that's not okay. You want to take it.
No, I get the city staff, it's attorneys, draft the bill, like that, I don't, I'm not.
To wrap this section up and move to the public comments. And just so ahead of time, we've made a change to how the public comments will be tonight. There is a sheet on a little table next to the podium. Instead of waiting 5 minutes between speakers, if you want to speak, go up, sign in, get in a queue, so we can just go through these people pretty quickly. Because I've already got 11 letters to read and I don't want to spend the night here. Okay, Max, do we have anything else we need to review with this?
In the public comment, I have a couple other things procedural I want to deal with.
Okay. Okay,
That's what you said.
are you signed in?
I already did.
And your name, just tell me your name and the first part of your address would be great.
Nobody taking time?
Yeah.
Could you please tell me when I have 30 seconds left? My name is Rolando Rivas. I live in 114 East 3rd Street in Historic Newcastle. It's not easy to stand here and talk about it, but I feel compelled to do this. I have attended a couple planning commission meetings concerning changes to the rules for tourist homes and short-term rentals. It has been interesting to observe that despite significant community opposition, most of the commission seems determined to move forward with more lenient regulations and expansion on short-term rentals in both the historic district and the greater city of Newcastle. These changes appear to me to be designed to benefit only a small number of residents. Peer review research, which has been clearly presented, continues to be largely ignored. It is naive to believe that simply because Newcastle was not specifically mentioned in a research study, the negative impacts of short-term rentals would not affect us. That's just poor statistics. Furthermore, it is troubling that some commissioners have selectively cited research findings, often misapplying them to support a predetermined narrative. This behavior is both unethical and highly irresponsible. Whether the impacts of short-term rentals are fully understood or not, you, the commissioners, have a duty to conduct a thorough risk assessment regarding the potential consequences of this decision. Are you willing to risk eroding the unique character of our community, of our town, its infrastructure, and jeopardizing the town's historic designation? Or will you prioritize the long-term well-being of the town over the financial gains of a few people? This is a risk assessment problem. You don't buy car insurance because you crash your car. You buy car insurance because there's a risk that you may crash your car. There is a risk that somebody may crash into you. That's why you buy the car insurance. Newcastle is first and foremost a residential area. As I said, we don't fully understand the impacts of short-term rentals in our community or any community and it's a risk that may exist. I urge you, please recommend to council to restrict, not to expand short-term rentals in the residential area and in historic Newcastle. Thank you for listening.
Still 30 seconds.
Thank you for your comments. Next. Let's go, come on.
Actually, I have a very brief question, and then I also have a
And your
brief
name?
question about,
Your name, please?
about section 2, which I think is very unclear. My very brief question is, cui bono? This is basically for business, short-term rentals, and I would love to see a good explanation of what it does for the residents. That's my question, and then I see section 2. If I need a copy of it.
I have an extra copy.
But I mean, I thought this actually, it's just, thanks. It just is not, it seems to be very unclear, and I think it ought to be, it says a house duplex, et cetera, where a tourist or transient guest rents sleeping or living accommodations. To me, it is very unclear, that it's the whole building. It should be, a house, et cetera, for which a tourist rents it. I mean, I really cannot tell when I'm reading that, if that is a whole building or just sleeping or living accommodation in the building. And I think that should be corrected.
You let us know your name and address, please.
I've only put in.
But you need to announce it.
And Dorothy says 23rd Street.
Okay, thanks very much.
Ellen Kentnor, 142 East Second Street. And my first comment is. Oh, sorry. My first comment is I really think that we all want the best for our community. And I don't think that this has to be a struggle where one side wins or one side loses. I think that we can come up with something that can satisfy most of us. I have a lot more to say, but I have to cross out a lot because most of my questions were answered. But I have one thing to say about the current thinking of the urban planning circles about livable towns of the future. And what they describe is a community much like ours. It includes residences built close together along sidewalks with privacy in the backyards. It talks about walkability and a commercial area which provides some goods and services. It includes open spaces shared by all, such as our parks. Reflecting on this, it seems to me that what we have here in historic Newcastle residential community is something very precious. And with that in focus, I think we should tread lightly and carefully, with careful thought and planning into our collective future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next. Name?
It's on here.
You still have to
No,
announce it.
city code specifically says you don't have to, and that's been that way for years. Just saying. Seems like there's a lot of maybes. And how many homes in the historic district actually have off-street parking? You had some statistics on, the available houses, but do we know how many have off-street? Because then that would be an automatic deduction from the potential houses that would qualify. Am I correct? I do go for the 2.5%, 2.25%. If it's gonna be 10 or 25 units, because like Commissioner Batty said, 10% is a lot of houses. I think homes should be inspected every year because you're gonna lose control over who's qualifying, who's keeping their home up to date, and it's a safety issue. Lock boxes, it's not unconstitutional, at least in the city of Wilmington, and I would assume it's standard all over the country. So I think a key should be available to the police or the fire, because what's gonna happen is they don't see a key, they're crashing the door, the windows, whatever they have to do to get in that house. And I think it could be a simple solution by providing a key in a lockbox, because they're secure, and only the police or the fire would have a key to it. I also feel short term should not be in residential areas, especially in the historic district. There's plenty of areas that they could be in commercial areas, that they do not need to be clogging up the city. And last, I really feel if you're keeping it to one parking space per room, a lot of people travel with motorhomes, boats, and different things that they're in tow. Where do they put that? Is that gonna be written in? You have to specify those type of things as well. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
My name is Charlie Kentnor. I live at 142 East Second Street. I wasn't going to speak, but seeing the presentation, I have a couple of observations. Number one, just in the overview, bed and breakfast occupancy rates nationwide on average range from 40 to 45%. So when you're thinking about a year, the owner of an Airbnb is going to get cares for rents. My observation on the parking is twofold. For one, it seems that if you say that off-street parking is required no matter how many spaces, that eliminates the possibility of rentals within the historic district to a significant degree. Not taking position one way or the other, it's just, I don't know if that's your intent. And the other thing is that I think something should be stated as to the location of the off-street parking. There could be wiggle room, that it's not even close to where it is, but somebody complies with the regulation because they retain off-street parking 300 feet away to football field, whatever. And the last one has to do with, I guess my concern, giving the general aspects of what's been presented, and my experience as a landlord in New York City. New York City has two forms of rental that are often abused. One is the rent stabilized, and whether it's the rent controlled apartment. And somebody, often this happens, somebody rents one of those units at a significantly lower market rental, and then turns around and rents it as for profit for themselves. And then you have a tenant, I speak from experience, you have a tenant that has a problem because they're locked out of their residence for whatever reason, or a fire, or emergency occurs, they don't have hot water. They only know one person, they don't know the landlord, they know the person they leased it from. And I see the possibility of that leading to somebody buying 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 duplexes in this town, owning them, leasing them, subleasing them to somebody else for some amount of money, and that person starts operating an Airbnb. They're not the owner. I think that sort of focus needs to be covered just so that to avoid problems. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
While you're signing in, let me just say that I believe that certainly in the historic district, I don't know about the rest of the city, you're not allowed to park large vehicles or commercial vehicles or boats on the street. It's just not allowed. So people coming in with motorhomes would have to be in compliance with that law. So just want to clarify that.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Rob Miller, 124 East Third Street. I hadn't planned to speak, I hadn't even planned to come today. And I thought this meeting was at the police station. And I walked all the way to the police station, and I walked all the way here.
So you've got your exercise.
Yes, that I did. Okay, but the reason I walked is because I don't like to give up my parking spot if I can help it. So, I want to change topics just a little bit. I'm sort of staying on topic, but I mean, I've kind of stayed out of this battle. It's been waging for some time now. Don't really have a dog in the fight necessarily. I haven't really paid strict attention to it until tonight. But what I would like to just remind folks in the room, not just on the planning board, but all you folks in the audience, I'm guessing the large percentage of you are against this whole Airbnb idea. But I've been complaining for 8 years to city council. I even came to a few planning board meetings, but this was years ago, about the situation with the rental properties in general in the city, particularly when it comes to the current laws, which, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time that I checked, and I don't think that they've changed, for if you have 3,400 square feet of lot size, then you technically can add an apartment to a single family home. Okay, and for every additional 1,700 square feet of lot size you have, you can add another apartment. Now, you have to go in front of the Board of Adjustment, of course. You know, you might have to jump through some hoops there with parking or whatever. But I've said for 8 years, I said the city needs to have an ordinance banning converting single-family homes into multi-unit apartments. Okay, I don't like to give up my parking spot because in my section of East Third Street, the renters outnumber the homeowners. Okay, I've got a sixplex, a triplex, duplex, another triplex. I mean, they're just renters all over the place. Okay, now they're all grandfathered in, of course, but you know, there's no parking spaces painted. There's no parking permits. So I'm just, you know, amazed that it's not worse than it is, and it can get worse. And those of you who live on the Strand, a lot of the houses, particularly on the water there, a lot of them have big lot sizes. So just think of that. If you have 3,400, 5,100, 6,800 square feet of lot size, just think what the future may hold if somebody comes in and decides they want to chop those big, beautiful homes into triplexes, quads, and 5-unit apartments. Okay, think what that will do to parking, let alone all the things that you're worried about, which I presume is just people that want to come and party and carry on, you know, and tear up the neighborhood and whatever. So just keep that in mind. If the city needs to change that as well. All right, now I know you're all single-minded of purpose right now on this issue, but I think this is a good time for me to weigh in to a bigger crowd, because for 8 years, the city has ignored. They looked at me like I'm from outer space when I bring this up. And it needs to change. Every town in Delaware and South Jersey has banned chopping up single-family homes into multi-unit apartments, except us.
Dang it, no one else has signed up. So we have a number of letters that were mailed into us.
Excuse me, I believe one of those letters is mine. I
Oh.
don't know.
If you had a chance to speak.
Oh, yay.
You can read it
That's
twice.
Look down.
So we're clear. I'm gonna instruct Anthony to set a timer on the
Please.
meeting. And if it gets to be 9:30, public comment started at 8:30, 1 hour of public comment.
Okay.
Just have one question. I know Ms. Glitch, you sent in a comment. Would you like it read or do you want to say it yourself? Okay.
Okay.
All right, I'll begin. This is from Ronald Buglitch. What every planning commissioner should know before voting. The idea of keeping short-term rentals like Airbnbs in commercial areas is sensible. Witness the wisdom of the 13 persons of the Legislative Commission for Newcastle County who voted in 2023 and 2024 to keep those types of rentals out of residential neighborhoods. The ordinance the commission crafted was presented to then County Executive and now Governor Matt Meyer, which he signed into law. The area under the jurisdiction of Newcastle County is substantial and includes more than 223,000 homes and businesses and more than 500,000 persons. The names of familiar towns under the county ordinance includes North St. George's, Bear, Greenville, Centerville, Hocus, and Claymont. Those who are in county residential areas receive protection from encroachment from those wishing to make money off of their neighbors by using neighbor complaint approach. For example, if a short-term rental surfaces in a neighborhood, a neighbor would call in a complaint and action would be taken to close the business. If this approach was a part of an ordinance enacted by Newcastle City Council, the 30 strand neighbors who have declared they are not interested in an Airbnb on their street are required to meet the spirit of the law. What we ask of the commission and council is nothing unusual or radical. Being in compliance with the county regulations, which apply to more than 500,000 persons and more than 200,000 homes surrounding historic Newcastle, is a well-measured and fair idea. Short-term rentals in commercial areas will result in businesses prospering, leaving residents to live without wondering about who's going to be coming and going next door. After all is said and done, who wants an Airbnb next to them? When a short-term rental or Airbnb or Vrbo platform is allowed in a residential neighborhood, there are no benefits for neighbors. The next one is from Terry, I apologize, Sorrentino and Jeffrey Cheskin of 31 The Strand. I'm aware of your consideration for short-term rental and Airbnb code changes at the meeting, and I would like to voice my concerns regarding short-term rentals located within a residential area. We have such a home basically in our backyard. We are met with light pollution at all times of the night, with outdoor and indoor lights being left on, sometimes all night. Parking is always an issue. For those who think it is not, I return home from our business around 10 p.m. at night with bags, a small dog, and many things to carry. Many nights I find parking several homes away, and I make 2 to 3 trips to haul everything I need into our home. More tourists parking overnight in the residential areas would cause additional strain on everyone's ability to be closer to their homes, to bring in groceries, plants, pets, etc. As reported in the last planning commission meeting, businesses on Delaware Street report that 75% of their income comes from people who live outside the city. Disrupting the lives of the folks who thought they were living in a truly residential area by adding tourist homes to boost tourism seems to be without merit. Many cities around the world are turning away from tourist homes, Airbnbs, short-term rentals. Over 15 years ago, we had a home in Raymond Key, Florida, just north of Key West. The county required rentals to be not less than 30 to prevent such issues with loud renters, overparking, and destroying the sense of community. There were strict reporting procedures and inspections. They understood the impacts of rentals, short-term rentals 15 years ago. The city of Newcastle should continue to focus efforts on promoting events, local hotels, shops, and restaurants, not short-term rentals. We're a small business with many out-of-town guests visiting us every weekend. We always recommend they visit historic Newcastle before they stop anywhere else. Shop, eat, and if they want to stay, we always recommend the Terry House. We love our guests, but I don't want them staying in our backyard. A commercial business should be located within a commercial center, commercial district, commercial sector. Letter is from Mr. Richard and Ms. Barbara Cooch. I write on behalf of myself and my wife, Barbara Cooch. We reside at 16 East 3rd Street in the Historic Residence District. We write regarding the issue on the allowance of tourist homes and other short-term rentals in the Historic Residence District. We strongly support an ordinance that would disallow the expansion of tourist homes and other short-term rentals into the historic district. A key part of this process now before the Planning Commission, as we see it, is for the Planning Commission to carefully study the efforts and results of other roughly similar cities and their towns that have wrestled with this issue of short-term rentals in residential districts, especially in historic residence districts. Some other jurisdictions have identified significant quality of life problems that have resulted from the lack of appropriate municipal regulation of short-term rentals. The city of Newcastle needs to get ahead as the best it can be of this issue. Of course, not all short-term rentals in the historic district now or in the future will present quality of life problems, but some or even many inevitably will present such issues. Complicated as this issue may be now, the issue is now being discussed and will very likely be harder in the future to solve by the Planning Commission and by the City Council if appropriate action is not taken now. The continuing appeal of the historic residential district to visitors and to Newcastle citizens alike over the many years has, in good part, by its constituents and by owners and long-term renters. The historic commercial district is, we think, the logical location for short-term rental commercial enterprises. This is from Mike Platt. Dear Planning Commissioners, my name is Michael, 11th Street. I'm aware of your consideration of short-term Airbnb code changes at this meeting, and I want to voice my concerns about this initiative. Today, short-term rentals are only allowed in the historic district and fortunately not in the rest of the city of Newcastle. We do not want to have short-term rentals in our neighborhoods. We know they just turn into troubled environments and bring people into our neighborhoods that we don't know and who may do things that are not in our best interest while they're there, such as drugs, alcohol consumption, and troublesome behavior. We don't need that kind of unpredictable disruption in our neighborhood and negatively affecting our families. You have not asked us who live outside the historic district by either polling us or canvassing us for our opinions. Do not make any assumptions that we will accept what you are apparently considering. We do not want any kind of short-term rental in our neighborhood. Please make a note of it and do not extend short-term rental to our neighborhood. Thank you.
David, I'm sorry, I didn't
No,
realize I
no,
gave
you're
you so
fine.
many.
This is from Anthony Parker of 105 West 6th Street. Dear members of the Planning Commission, the many voices of residents, those most directly affected by short-term rentals in areas zoned residential, and in particular, those zoned as historic residential areas, seem to be ignored by this commission. The clear and overwhelming evidence of necessary restrictions or outright bans and the reasons for them on such properties in residential neighborhoods across the country and around the world are also being ignored by our commission. Much of this very information has been clearly and professionally submitted to this commission. We do not have a problem with or many complaints about short-term rentals in Newcastle. However, legislation to prevent such problems in the future is essential, as many communities have learned to, grammatical error here, have learned their frustration through protracted fights to remove short-term rentals. Precedent is an extremely important question, and preventable legislation is necessary to include future problems and erosion of community. Obviously, some communities would and perhaps should welcome short-term rentals as an advantageous addition to the local economy. Nevertheless, today, more often than not, where there is a historic neighborhood, even in these communities, complaints and evidence have resulted in rules being created to preserve the character and quality of the residential community and historic areas by restricting short-term rentals. Taken as a whole, the literature available about the destructiveness to residential areas and their residential communities is overwhelming in opposition to the establishment of short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods. That is why we have commercial districts. Planning commissions across the country and around the world see the current problem and are acting to inhibit their growth. Why does ours not? I urge the Planning Commission to be forward-thinking and for the sake of the entire community to reject proposals which would permit short-term rentals in the zoned residential areas.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan.
Dr. Olivos, so would you like me to read it again?
No, yeah, no, he's already spoken.
Okay.
Just can set aside.
This is from Carol Vukovic. Dear Planning Commissioners, my name is Carol Vukovic. I live at 33 The Strand in Newcastle. I attended and spoke at the recent Planning Commission meetings regarding changes to the city's tourist home, whole home short-term rental codes. I am deeply disappointed that the residents' outpouring concern regarding allowing tourist homes in residential neighborhoods appears to have not been heard by you. Perhaps if letters are read by your chair, you would be more attentive to residents' concern. That is my hope. Many residents have repeatedly said that we do not want whole home short-term rentals in our residential neighborhoods. While the literature is filled with descriptions of the negative impact of whole home short-term rentals on the culture of residential neighborhoods, some of you choose to believe otherwise. We want to believe that Newcastle is not like any other city in the United States or the world. Only people interested in history will rent Newcastle. The culture of our neighborhoods will not change. Nonsense. You are the planning commission. Your task is to look into the future to ensure that the decisions you make are right for our special town. The literature clearly inclines you to say that for-profit whole home short-term rentals significantly change and damage neighborhoods. Please take the necessary action to place significant restrictions on these disruptive and neighborhood damaging enterprises, ones that allow some to profit at their neighbors' expense. Thank you, Carol Vukovich. And lastly, Ron Stack, 104 East 3rd Street, Newcastle, Delaware. These comments are based on my anticipation of how I suspect most commissioners will vote this evening on regulated short-term rentals in our town. I would like to congratulate most of you, commissioners, for your courage and fortitude over the last months of addressing the real concerns over the fate of short-term rentals in our community. You've demonstrated this in many ways, which I'd like to recap. You've chosen to ignore the direction that our neighboring towns have taken to thoughtfully regulate and respond to concerns over short-term rentals. Likewise, you've minimized or disregarded study after study showing the negative effect on property values that short-term rentals have in communities large or small. You appear to embrace alternate and some downright or misappropriated research on the benefits or risk of encouraging short-term rentals everywhere. To paraphrase one of the commissioners at the last meeting, why shouldn't you have the right to rent out your home for 45 days if you are away? If you own a home anywhere, it seems you seem to believe it's your right to do that no matter what the consequences. From what I've observed in the last months, most of the public opinion expressed at these meetings, including my own, has been in opposition to the short-term rentals in the historic district. Those reasons are straightforward. It's residential. People love living there and want to protect historic property values. We want to know our neighbors. Beyond that, any of the 100 or so long-term rentals in the historic area alone can easily flip to short-term unless you do something to change our antiquated 1968 rules that have little teeth and are not enforced. You have pretty much ignored, discouraged, and disregarded our careful reasoning, well-documented research, and strong public opinion. All of the above takes guts and fortitude, and to not even engage in a dialogue with anyone on the issues and concerns, well, that's heroic, isn't it? If nothing else, I applaud the stamina you've demonstrated in so firmly taking a stand that is contrary to the expressed concerns of a substantial voice in the community. I hope that my points above will be irrelevant and that you will take a different approach than the cards you've already shown. I'm hoping you will model a fair-minded government that is forward-thinking, that weighs all evidence carefully, and that fairly protects both the residential and commercial investments that we residents have made. Newcastle is our home, and I sincerely hope you demonstrate the courage and fortitude to preserve it.
Thank you. Okay, a few more. So from Kathleen Curran, I guess that's it, 411 Delaware Street, dear Commission members, as a Newcastle resident and soon-to-be homeowner, I write with a sense of urgency concerning the thoughtful regulation of short-term rentals in the historic residential district. Several weeks ago, I wrote privately to Ms. Souter to express concern about short-term rentals in the historic district. At first, I was nonchalant about the issue, but became increasingly concerned after speaking with a trusted colleague in Charleston, South Carolina, who was a member of a task force seeking to control the real estate havoc caused by short-term rentals in that city. I write now to specifically address two documented consequences of short-term rentals and how they relate specifically to historic Newcastle. The first well-known consequence of short-term rentals is their effect on housing affordability. on the front page of the recent April 23rd, 2025 issue of the Weekly, the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce warned of Delaware's aging population, shrinking workforce, and rising costs, noting that home prices have surged more than 56% in just 4 years, limiting housing options for workers and employers alike. Page 15. This has direct relevance to Newcastle, where home prices continue to rise. The second documented consequence of short-term rentals is they often pit business community against the residential community. I've anecdotally seen examples of this unfortunate situation. What needs to be said, however, is that the unaffordability of housing here also affects members of the business community, many of whom support short-term rentals and hope to live here or buy a house or scale up or down depending on their financial situation. Everyone suffers when housing becomes more expensive because homeowners see that converting their homes to a short-term rental is a lucrative business, despite those who have argued in this room that they are not that lucrative. If they were not that lucrative, people would not use that option, let's be honest. Finally, we have heard over and over again that short-term rentals would bring in tourists because Newcastle is a tourist town. We happen to share a driveway with an Airbnb and have spoken with visitors and observed how they use the short-term rental apartment. Surprisingly, they don't seem to frequent the many fine restaurants we have in the area. They have cooking equipment in the apartment. They are certainly not signing up to visit the beautiful George Reed House Museum, which the curator tells me has seen dropping attendance since COVID. They are mostly here for personal reasons. In conclusion, we could all be more transparent and honest with our, okay? Next. I'm reading this. I am HB Beal, 26 The Strand. As a 20-year resident of the Packet Alley neighborhood, I feel that the nexus of my concern is the intrusion into our lifestyle by the surprise designation of an Airbnb within our community. Please be certain this cannot happen to others. A recent study by a local resident found that within the commercial area there are available short-term rentals which are not utilized, hence there is no need for additional Airbnbs within the historic area. 12 unincorporated municipalities within Newcastle County have exclusions for whole house short-term rentals. Why the city should not follow the same protocol? In closing, I would implore you as fellow residents to recommend that the city council follow the desires of 100 historic residential homeowners who wish their living experience to remain strictly residential and non-commercial. Dear Planning Commissioners, my name is Sandy Beal and I live at number 26 The Strand. I am writing to voice my deep concern about the Commission's handling of the Airbnb proposition. Opening up additional options for this type of tourist accommodation in a historic district that already offers ample housing is irresponsible. Veiled truth is that if they build it, they will come is the motivator for those proponents of more Airbnbs. Those of us who value the historic nature of this 350-plus-year-old colonial treasure wish to be custodians for what we have inherited, a singularly pristine early presentation of early life of three countries settlement in the New World. We should preserve as did our forebears. Thank you, Sandy Beal. We're done.
So for the public's benefit, can I say, and maybe for the commission's discussion, say how I think we ought to proceed? So I was looking during the public comment at the changes you guys made, and I don't think they're all that difficult to make. I got a couple of things I gotta research. I think it's not difficult. My difficulty is I'm gonna be away for the rest of the week, so it's gonna be next week. But I could certainly get that from a week from Friday to have a draft that incorporates these changes. It'd be my recommendation that you schedule this for a public hearing at your next regularly scheduled meeting. Have a public hearing, have folks come in, say what they want to say on the ordinance. We can have it, Antonina, we can have it posted on the website with the changes that were discussed. And at that point, we could either have a business meeting after that meeting for a recommendation, or you could decide, I wanna listen to take in all the comments and do it at another meeting. That would be up to you guys, but I would definitely put that on the agenda to have a vote on a recommendation. We can make changes on the fly. If there are changes that are needed, they come out of the public hearing. If there's too many of them, I'm gonna ask the table, and then I'll make the changes and we'll have a clean document. But that's sort of the process going forward. Does that sound like a reasonable path?
Yeah.
It does with regard to your tasks, but I think we've heard loud and clear from the public that people outside of the historic district feel that they are not being listened to and that we need to pull them in some way. And I fear that we're moving forward with something that will be mightily disliked by many. And it doesn't appear that public hearings or people's input is being materially considered in this construction of this
The reason for a public hearing is to give all those folks the opportunity to come in to make sure it's publicized, just like another public hearing. That's the reason I'm recommending that. I don't know that a public hearing is technically even required in this instance, the way we are, but I think it's a good idea. Regarding polling, as far as an ordinance, this one's had more sort of hearings or, usually it's, I draft something and then there's something. So this one's had a lot of play and a lot of play in the paper, if folks want to comment. Look, we can draft this, I can draft it up. You guys can vote not to recommend if you don't, or you can vote for changes for them. My task was to get something in front of us to consider. That's ultimately, you guys get to make the recommendation for however that was gonna be.
I know a follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
So, and this is for either Margaret or Max or whoever maybe has the better answer. So the tourist homes currently, because I'm not overwhelmingly familiar with the code, tourist homes currently are very ill-regulated, correct? To a large degree? Like, we can almost say it's almost non-existent.
Correct. There's 2 off-street parking spaces requirement and there's not much else.
Right, so
I forget the districts that are allowed in.
I won't call them accusations, but that's what they feel like tonight. In public comments, that we're doing nothing about this. So if we were doing nothing about this, we wouldn't be in this meeting at 9:13 at night, right? Like, this is the 4th meeting, this has been a major prevailing topic. We're trying to regulate it to make it appropriate, correct? Like, we are following, so it may not be what people want because it's their backyard, but we are establishing something to move forward and create regulation where there is none currently.
So, well, there's limited, I would argue. So the way this worked was, there was initially a discussion before the council, where folks had raised sort of with respect to the tourist home and the allowance thereof. And that's when I got involved. I said, yep, we're reading the code right. And so they are allowed. And there was a discussion. The council, and you may remember from the first packet in one of these meetings, the council gave specific sort of direction points, and we've been following those direction points thus far. This is a public process, right?
Yeah.
So you can vote against it or make other recommendations. I hope you guys understand that I do not have a position on any of this stuff. I'm just trying to do the best I can, taking in what I hear and trying to draw something up that's in accordance with
No,
that.
and I think this is more of a conversation that I wanna have with all of us, that the public can hear, is that we're not doing nothing. I mean, this is, like you said, loosely or limited regulation on something that exists currently. We're trying to impose some pretty significant restrictions or limitations on that. Short of banning it, there's not much more to do. So to say that we're not doing anything and that we're boldly and heroically moving forward with doing nothing is a pretty bold statement, considering this is the 4th meeting in which this is a major topic.
I think you feel the same way as I do, is we're allowing this to happen now. They're like, all of a sudden we're saying, oh yeah, let's bring all the Airbnbs here. And what we're trying to say is, no, they could be here anyway without any regulation from us, and without anything. And I think that's the accusations we feel. But
Go ahead.
I just want to go back to a couple of things I said. I really think we should limit it to 2.5% in each district. I think because the historic commercial district only has 31 units to begin with, historic commercial should not have a limit, and the Terry House should be grandfathered in to the parking provision. And those are the 3 things that that I stand by on these things.
I'm going to, two things. On the tourist home issue, I just don't want to be obtuse or say the wrong thing. I know in the commercial area they're allowed, I would have to go back and look and see what, because there was.
They're allowed in the residential area.
I just don't.
They
know
are,
the answer.
I can tell you,
I do. And second, what I was also thinking is, this ordinance is effective upon adoption. And what I'm going to put into the ordinance is certain kind of short-term potential exemptions from the ordinance. So for example, the Terry House would be exempted as legally existing non-conforming use. It's a bed and breakfast, doesn't have off-street parking, that would be an exemption. I think we heard loud and clear, I think that's a consensus or at least a thought process among most. There are the others with respect to existing B&Bs that are already here, or not B&Bs, excuse me, short-term rentals. I'll put those in for your consideration and you can take a look at them and evaluate those. But I'm talking 3 or 4 exemptions. And then coming out of the hearing, there may be more, right? We'll just have to see what happens.
And just for the people that are currently here, there are roughly 2,855 housing units in the city. 2.5% is 71 units. There's roughly 535 in the historic district. You would get roughly 13 approvals, license approvals, plus you have to have off-street parking. So this is gonna severely limit, and I really think there is a balance. I highly doubt you would get 13 with off-street parking. But I think it should be an option. I think there's a balance. We should not have our residential areas inundated. I do not live in historic commercial or historic residential. I do live in an outside district, and for people who do not come to these meetings and know about them, to say that we're not polling them when there's ample opportunity to write in and to come speak before us. Especially somebody who, no, I'm not gonna say it. That's my answer. Please attend the meetings. If you have something to say and you feel you're not represented, if you don't attend a meeting, just like you don't attend a council meeting or you don't vote, nobody knows what you're thinking.
Even the people attending aren't being heard. Simple.
Public comments over. Thank
you.
Do you need something from us at this point, I guess?
Just so everyone's clear that that's the way I'm going to approach it, as long as that's okay.
I would concur with, Kristen, that 2.5% is a better figure than 5.
So I'm gonna leave in the 5, which we discussed earlier. You guys can take a vote on that. Because, I'm just gonna leave it in at 5 now and I'll let you guys vote on it. You can change it to 2.
Don't you work for us?
I do, but I'm trying to look at everybody, I'm trying to count the votes. So I got 2.5 here, 2.5 here. I have 2.5 down there. I'll be an auctioneer. I have 2.5. Do I have 2.5? Yep. Guess what? I'm changing it to 2.5. I thought.
Thank you.
My question, Max, is if we had it at 2.5 and we wanted, wouldn't it be easier to increase it if we found people wanted to increase it versus decrease it?
Yeah,
I feel like-
it's a marketing problem.
That's fine.
It's a whole other discussion for a whole other night.
What's that?
It's a whole other discussion for a whole other night.
Thank you for your work.
I didn't do bad, actually.
We did about this stuff, yeah.
Cynthia, do you wanna try to do a hack report?
5
Should we
seconds?
Just 5 seconds would be great.
I can. We reviewed 2 applications in the last meeting. One was very germane. It was a sign in the window on Delaware Street. Which the Historic Area Commission denied the current use of that sign, but provided instruction to the business owner how to make it acceptable and how to actually reuse her sign, which was interesting. But that's relevant because we've completed a document on signing in the historic commercial district, which is with Anthony Linnell. And I don't know what the status of it is. I wrote most of it. It's not an easy thing to characterize, but trying to be very specific to help business owners understand what they need to do. And I hope that we can approve that in our next meeting and send it to the city council. The other thing that we approved was 206 Delaware Street, behind the Mercury, remove the garage and replace with a meeting space and a commercial kitchen, which is very exciting, and he's gonna be going forward with that. So good things are happening in the Historic Area Commission.
Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Kristen Zumar, motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Meeting? Adjourned.
I think you have reference on your mics.
Yes.
You do.
But it's